Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, hosted in conjunction with our partners at LabTwin. My name is Ryan. I am an associate senior producer at Oxford Global. I also organize our Smart Labs and Laboratory Informatics Congress this year. This afternoon, we are discussing data quality as a service, challenges and opportunities for digital lab assistants. We're joined today by three senior experts in the area of laboratory enhancement and development. Mike Berkey, Director at Amgen. We will be joined shortly by Mario Richter as well, who is a Director at AbbVie, and Celia Gaslin, Marketing Communications Manager at LabTwin. I wanted to begin by letting our panelists introduce ourselves. And just before I do that, I just wanted to mention that if you had any questions throughout this session, please enter them into the questions tab. We'll be more than happy to answer them at the end of the session. So yeah, I really wanted to hear our experts introduce themselves. So if Celia, I wondered if you wanted to start.
Sure, thank you, Ryan. So hi everyone, I'm Celia, and I'm actually a neuroscientist from background, and I work now on LabTwin to develop a voice assistant for laboratories. And during my postdoc at TPFL in Switzerland, I had the chance to be engaged in the digital transformation of my lab with LIMS and ELN implementation and integration. And when I had to publish my data in a structured and open database together with my publication, I could really appreciate how easy it was to find back all the data, and especially the metadata in our digital system. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today on data quality.
Excellent. And Mike.
Great, thanks, Ryan. My name is Mike Burke. I'm a Director of Research and Automation Technologies here at Amgen. I've been with Amgen almost 18 years now. So it's interesting to me to see how things have changed over time. 18 years ago, my group's responsibilities were largely, the lab automation equipment and the integration of it or customization, and that's changed quite a bit. And now we're finding that the greater challenges in the lab are actually informatics, and just managing the amount of data that we're generating and how to make smart decisions with it. So I think this is a very timely webinar, and I suspect that this is sort of the situation across the entire industry. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. And Mario, we're just introducing ourselves. I wondered if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Sorry for being late. I couldn't get connected earlier. So yeah, my name is Mario. I'm with Abbott, AbbVie now. For the last 11 years of my career. I've had multiple different positions within the DMPK-BA group in AbbVie. I've introduced automation into our workflows quite a while ago, and with this automation, I only heard parts of what Mike was saying, but with the automation, of course, what happened is that we generated a lot of data, and some of the data we just cannot evaluate because it's just too much. Getting an infrastructure in place that allows us to make better use better use of that data would be very nice to see. So that's definitely one of the challenges I see as well, is that there's so much data out there, and it would be nice to put it in a way that we can easily retrieve more information from it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. To begin with, we are going to be discussing the current challenges faced by pharmaceutical organizations when it comes to data, what current initiatives are in place for data quality. Pharmaceutical companies rely heavily on large amounts of data from across all their processes, with the challenges of measuring, interpreting, and integrating that data. This takes place in a landscape of increasingly rigorous standards and regulations for data use, and as the amount of data collected continues to grow, with an increased emphasis placed on data quality monitoring. We'd like to start by asking our experts their own experiences around their initiatives in this place and the core challenges they face. So Mario, what are the major initiatives around data at AbbVie, and what are the main goals that you're looking to achieve through these initiatives?
Yeah, I think what you're presenting here on the slide is those are all good examples, because we are active in, I would say, all of these areas that are described here. Again, coming back to what I said earlier, the biggest driver at the very moment is to make best use of the data that's available. So when we create data for one project, one program, it would be nice to learn from that, have it in a structured way, so that we can draw conclusions for the next program that is coming that is coming up in our pipeline. That either maybe it's the same target even, or it's a different target but a similar molecule. Basically, in the end, from the things you have on the slide, I think we're touching on all of those. And the other thing, of course, also making data comparable to what other people in the or what other companies are doing, or even academic groups sometimes, and we generate the data. Sometimes it would be nice to be able to compare what we've done to what was done out there, and make our data, yeah, easily accessible and comparable. That's a big driver.
Excellent. Mike, what do you see as the core data integrity initiatives that are in use at Amgen?
Yeah, so there's a great slide, right? Because it does sort of identify several initiatives, all of which are being worked on at Amgen, but we're at different stages for each one. Data integrity is sort of where it starts for us, right? And that's probably where we're furthest along. I think we have a solution in place where, as we add instruments into the lab, we have an automated process where the data that comes off of those instruments is automatically moved into a write once, read only location, so that we're confident that we're never going to lose the raw data and the metadata that comes with it. And then it sort of cascades from there, right? We have other sort of automated file structures where you have sort of a working area with the data, and then once you generate a final report, that also goes to a write once, read only area of the file system. So I think in that regard, we're in fairly good shape, and it's in place. But it just leads to the next challenge, right? Which is the data integration challenge. And I think that's sort of where we're at now, is we're doing lots and lots of data engineering, which, probably is not, from a technical perspective, the most high-flying or the most challenging initiative. It's just a ton of work. There's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of instruments in the lab, all generating data in some unique format. Some it's there are some standards out there, obviously, but the challenge is just to parse all this data and get it into a comprehensive system that you can then go further with. So I think that's sort of where we're at now. Happening in parallel with that is we have a group that's developing data models, but they're sort of waiting for the data, this large amount of data, to be accessible. So that's kind of where I feel like we're at now. My perspective on it is maybe a little bit biased, because the area that my group in particular works with, it is with the lab automation in the lab, right? So we're sort of the poor suckers that deal with the scientists on a day-to-day basis saying, I need my data to get into here, you need to parse it, So that's where I have the most personal involvement. But I do know that there are other groups developing models. As far as a data lake in research, I'm not sure that we're quite there yet. We're looking at different solutions. I know further downstream, process development has implemented a data lake. So hopefully we'll have some lessons to learn from them and can sort of leverage their experience with that as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So I just wanted to cover, you covered some of those challenges there, and I just wanted to ask Mario as well, both of you, what are the core challenges that you see remaining in this area? What are the core things that you're looking to solve in this area?
Difficult question. A lot of things, I would say. I mean, one thing that Mike was just mentioning, almost as a side note, but one thing that I can see is that making having good metadata together with your data is one of the big challenges. I mean, making sure that once we have the data and it goes into either it goes to a drive, or it goes to even something bigger like a data lake within a company. The question is, how do you retrieve it? So one of the big challenges that we have is to make sure that we have some metadata that allows us to retrieve that data and make sense out of it. Of course, there's other challenges also. Just sometimes the sheer amount of data that we get from some of the instruments is a challenge by itself. Making sure that we can that we have a good concept in place how to store it long term and archive the data, or just figuring out the piece of it that we want to store and archive for later retrieval. So yeah, I think there's multiple challenges, and the things that you have on the slide, I think they're addressing different pieces of that. And yeah, as Mike was saying, I hope that data integrity is something that we have somewhat under control in our labs. But also that every now and then we learn that something is happening that shouldn't happen or shouldn't have happened. Yeah. So yeah, I think there are multiple challenges again. I think again one big one, if I could pick one, is this metadata, making sure that the data that we understand kind of in 5 years or 10 years or now data from 5 years ago, that we still understand what was done at the time. And understand also whether we can reuse, whether we can really reuse it. If we want to repurpose it, and that's something we've seen, for example, is that sometimes we say, well, the data looks similar actually, so let's compare it, and then you realize, oh no, it's a completely different instrument and it's a completely different workflow at the time. You cannot compare it. It looks comparable, but you cannot compare it. It doesn't make sense if you do. So that's one of the challenges that I can see.
Absolutely, excellent. So let's talk about the next area, which is the data journey and the path from data collection to data-driven decisions. Data is first collected at the bench by scientists or automatically collected by instruments. Through some structures and processing, the data is then stored in different repositories such as ELNs, LIMS, or data lake. This data is then integrated, analyzed, compiled into data models. Eventually, this data can be leveraged to drive the next actions. Mario, what are the most important factors in success from collection to integration?
Structure, I would say. So back to what I had said before, I think it's making sure that if I want to be able to integrate it, I have to understand it, and I have to understand really from the source. So from capture and collect, I have to understand what happened to the data in between. And also I have to be able to somewhat understand that, what happened at the very first stage. So if data, for example, got lost or something was done differently than it usually should be. So ideally, of course, the way it's drawn here, ideally you have almost a chain here. You're working on chain, yeah. So you have a clear path forward, but sometimes that clear path is disturbed because something didn't work the way it wasn't done the way it was supposed to be done or executed in the lab. And I think that's one of the big challenges. So then at the time when you integrate, understand that the quality of your data and the value of your data.
Absolutely. Does that then become particularly difficult across different sites?
Yes, sure. I mean, if you then that's another layer of complexity. If the same and what we think is the same type of work is done at multiple sites, then making sure that you can still trust and believe in that it was the same process, then that's good. But it would be better to be able to control that. Yeah.
And then metadata. How important is that to compare data?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, Mike, do you want to take that? But I think from what I said before, I think it's the metadata is what makes it then comparable in the end, because it tells us, okay, yeah, it's really the same process, same instrument, same whatever, same equipment in the lab, same liquid that was used, same lot that was used, whatever can come to our minds here. That is what the metadata can be used for.
Yeah, I mean, metadata is obviously already becoming a recurring theme in this discussion, right? I think it's massive, right? And Mario gave a great example right there of like, well, what if you're running the same instrument, the same assay, the same process, but on 2 different continents, and the data doesn't look the same? You know, why is that? And we don't know. You know, maybe you don't know, but if you are collecting that data, that metadata of like, well, what time was it run? You know, and they ran it in the morning in one location, in the afternoon, and the building is facing to the west, and so the sun was setting, and the temperature in the lab was 5 degrees different. You know, it could be something like that, or it could be something that we don't even know what it is today, right? And in our minds, it wouldn't be intuitive for us to connect those dots. But if we had a model that could look at all the metadata, the model might identify this sort of non-intuitive relationship and point out, oh, this is what you need to control, or you know, a different lever that you have to tweak to sort of, you know, homogenize the data or get it consistent. So I think metadata, you know, is a huge deal. And I think the good news is, you know, now with all the big data technologies, you know, we're more capable than ever of collecting all that data and just sort of holding on to it on the good faith that it's going to bear fruit for us and be relevant. So.
And sorry, Mike, but where do you see the biggest challenges and areas for improvement for collection and integration?
I mean, I'm going to go back to, again, what I know personally, and it's just the resources to do it, right? To put these systems into place. You know, again, I think I have sort of a unique perspective on this because my group's traditional role has been to do it ourselves and to do it internally. And traditionally, there's been some advantages to that because we can do things very fast. There's no, you know, whole engagement process with a vendor and so forth. But that only scales so much, right? And so we traditionally have operated at sort of a lab bench level. And the solutions we put in place are you know, perhaps for you and the 3 people working in your lab, not enterprise-wide. But this now has to happen, you know, research-wide or enterprise-wide. And again, the good news is there's a lot of third parties, vendors now that are offering these solutions. So the challenge is almost gone from implementing the technical solution ourselves to it's almost equally challenging to find a vendor that has a technical solution that, you know, sort of fits best with us, right? So, and that's kind of where we're at now, is it build versus buy. And then if we think that, yeah, we don't have the resources to do it internally, who do we buy from? And you know, startups are popping up like popcorn everywhere. So there's a lot of research in that area going on right now to figure out, you know, who's going to be our partner for this, or partners, plural.
Agree there.
Absolutely. Celia, where is there room for improvement for major pharmaceutical companies when faced with this funnel of data?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of effort to be done to integrate and standardize indeed the data, but we can only work on the data that we've captured already. And we saw over the years a lot of development from machine learning and AI in terms of data processing, but there's surprisingly very little that has changed regarding note-taking. It's still a combination of paper notes and typing into an ELN when you can access a computer, and if you can also interrupt your experiment. Sometimes you even need a second person just assisting you with note-taking during an animal surgery, for example. So here I see a big room for improvement at the first step of the journey to fuel this funnel with as much data as possible. And indeed, more than the data itself, which always ends up being captured in one way or another, the context in which data is captured, this metadata that we're talking about that can explain the small variation or the lack of reproducibility, is still not easily recorded because it's an extra effort on top of the mandatory data captured. So facilitating and automatizing this first step can really make a difference, I think, for the data processing in the later stages.
Excellent. Okay, so moving along, I wanted to, what are the challenges of collecting data at the bench? How does laboratory data collection, how is it done currently, and how does it impact the digitalization process? So to begin with, Mario, I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think she had a good point here. Is the way data is collected is we moved away from paper in most of the areas, at least not all, but in most of the areas we moved away from paper into ELNs, But then the question is always, or what happens oftentimes is that people do document what they have done, not right where they did it, not at the bench, but they go back to the office and then they maybe chat about it and then they document it. Of course, that's not a process they should follow, but that's how things happen. So that this immediate documentation of data in a way that it can then be reused, retrieved, that is what is still missing or not as good as it could be. I mean, we were playing around, for example, with iPads. People would have their iPads and the ELN would run on the iPads and they would start, they would use the pen on the iPad, but none of these things really work too well because it always, and I think this animal surgery, for example, or cell culture, those are good examples where you cannot just move out of a cell culture hood and start taking notes and then go back into the hood. Nobody will do that. I mean, even if they told you they have done so, they wouldn't. It makes no sense. So yeah, this collection of data right at the place where it's happening, where it's generated, and the documentation around it, that's where I think there's room for improvement, quite a bit of room for improvement.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mike, Mike, so I'll ask you the same question.
I'm almost laughing at this. This is maybe the single most thing that's near and dear to me, right? But first of all, a little background. My technical background is in computer science. And you know, my personal technical contributions at Amgen are like writing a lot of software and apps that are used. Again, it's sort of like the lab scale in the bench, right? And so, you know, because I get to talk directly to the scientists at the bench, it's very near and dear to me to build them, you know, a beautiful, super efficient user interface, right? And that's always been sort of a niche that I really enjoy working in. But the anecdote that I love to tell, it actually involves my wife. She was a nurse in the newborn nursery at the hospital, and she was working in the nursery during this period where they transitioned from charting, you know, with pencil and paper on a manual clipboard to an electronic lab notebook. And she absolutely hated it. I mean, it was like the most excruciating part of her job. And she called me one day, almost in tears, saying, "I just hate you software people, the things you make us do." And the example she gave me, she goes, "You know, I have to record every time that a baby pee-pees, right?" And she said, "I used to be able to pick up my pencil and write on a piece of paper, pee-pee, and a date and time stamp, and that was it." And she said, "It just took me 13 mouse clicks, 4 windows, 5 menus to find the checkbox and enter the thing and select the calendar thing." You know, it's horrible. It was a horrible experience for, not to mention the physical part of it where, I mean, they didn't even have iPads. She had like a computer on a cart that she had to roll into the patient's thing. So it went from being the easiest thing in the world for her, where she didn't have to think about it at all, and it was, you know, just automatically recorded it well for her purpose, to where now she had to push around this big cart with a big monitor, and it was gangly, and they had to get in and out of doors, and then click a whole bunch of times to actually record this data. And the problem was for her at the, you know, in the patient's room, or for us at the lab bench, they weren't seeing the benefit of having it recorded in a consistent digital way, right? So the only impact of doing all that, she felt, was her job just became, you know, an order of magnitude harder and slower and more frustrating. And she was focused not on patient caregiving, but on all this administrivia stuff, you know. So she was not benefiting, you know, from the full loop, right? Where, okay, all that data is being looked at in a data model, and now decisions can be made on how to better treat a patient, or you know, identify a problem earlier or something like that. So I've kind of lost track of where I was going with this story now. I started with like, the user interface, ability to collect that data at the bench was very important. But I think also, you know, right now we have scientists that they're willing to do it, or they're, you know, being told this is what you have to do, sort of on the faith, right, that ultimately we're going to be able to collect all this data and make better decisions than we can otherwise make once we have these models in place. And, you know, I don't think we've fully realized that yet. So we're sort of operating on the faith that the effort will be worth it in the long run, or, you know, the juice will be worth the squeeze, right? Okay, so that's my story that I love to share with everybody. Make good user interfaces.
Excellent. So Celia, how can digital lab assistants improve data collection, and what would then be the benefits of their use?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, today in our world, most of the knowledge is accessible from a computer, and that's why it's natural to make computer software, because we want to do a lot of actions through it, especially in the current situation where we exchange mail, buy food, or book vaccine appointments through our computer. But we also want now this access when we don't sit at the computer. We want to walk in the street or drive a car and interact with the system. And that's why now everybody is walking around with a smartphone, and voice assistants are gaining interest in being used while driving, for example. So it's only natural to wish for the same easy access to the IT system to come to the lab. During an experiment, your hands are also busy and things happen fast, like in the car. So voice become the best way to interact with the lab system and to record the note the same way a colleague would do next to you. So having such a digital lab assistant in the lab improves the efficiency, because there's no more need for an interruption or retyping the note at the end of the day on the ELN. You can just voice your results, and then they are immediately digitized and hopefully uploaded to your ELN. But it has also a real impact on the quantity and quality of the data, because when during experiments, you just need to voice something like, oh, the rotaviper is broken and I use the oven instead to dry my sample at 60 degrees for 24 hours. This information is saved, where before this would have been lost or maybe incorrectly remembered. So this improved the quality and quantity of the data that is captured. And our customer usually report this increase by a 2 or 3 times fold of the details of the capture of the metadata.
Fantastic. So with all the challenges that we face and the influx of data created, how do we ensure documentation and accessibility, particularly for long-term projects? And how possible is it to track back information about past experiments? Mike, I wanted to start with your experience here.
Yeah, well, great and very timely question, because I actually have a staff member going through this now, right, where he's working on a report, and some of the scientists that, you know, ran experiments to generate data for that report are no longer at Amgen, no longer at the company. You know, so he's having to go back through their lab notebooks and sort of extract data from that. And again, this comes back to metadata, you know. So the data is there, but there have been several questions raised about, yeah, this doesn't quite look right. Is this actually what happened? And there's, the context is missing. You know, there isn't a person to just, you know, go ask face to face. Is this actually what happened in the lab? Is it, you know, how exactly did you do this? And it's not recorded in the ELN. So it's making it very challenging, you know, to be able to accurately report on that data, because some of that metadata, you know, wasn't recorded at the time, and we don't have the person to go back to. You know, so that's kind of one of the challenges, right? Is especially as time goes, I mean, there's always turnover of people, and you sort of lose some of that data, right? That at the time just wasn't formally recorded. So that's one of the challenges that we're having now.
Absolutely. And Mario, if I were to ask you the same question.
Very, very similar, very almost the same answer, I would say, from what I've seen in our labs, is that if you look at the stations on the slide here, that on each of the stations you do record some of the data. I mean, for us it works differently. Actually, the other way around. Basically, we start with storage, picking out samples, going to a robot, going to the next robot, and then creating data in the very end. But yeah, so at each of the stations, you create some data, but the linkage is what is missing. And just like Mike was saying, sometimes if you have a manual process in between, that worsens the whole situation even more. But also just thinking about robotics again, usually what you don't really do is to make sure that you in the end you have a system, an overarching system that can retrieve data for me. If I, for example, say for a sample with a barcode 123, now give me all of the information that is available. That's almost impossible. That might be possible for some sub-routine, so to say, here in the process, but not for the whole. If you talk about end-to-end experiment, not for the whole end-to-end experiment. Yeah, and of course, and if you don't have, if you're not capable of doing that in a reliable fashion, then again we're back to what we discussed, is that then it's hard to compare that data, because it might be that the one step that is not documented well enough, that's the one that makes the difference. And if it's multiple of these steps in between, then good luck finding the one that's causing trouble.
Absolutely. So Celia, when we're discussing the challenges of data accessibility, how can a digital lab assistant help?
I remember there was this drama in my lab when a knowledgeable person would leave, and we couldn't ask them anymore, like, what did you do there? What happened? And we just had to go through paper notes of like, if you're lucky, the person wrote very nicely, but if you're not lucky, it's barely readable. So redressing back an experiment is clearly a challenge, because so far the only common thing between the different steps is a scientist and his memory, and hopefully a good one. So if you give this person a digital lab assistant to work with, then it can record information about every action in its context, and therefore connect these islands together. So this helps to have a end-to-end narration of the workflow of the full story. And then, of course, this data need to be easily accessible. So this is why we think it's also the role of a digital lab assistant to collect this data in a structured manner, and to facilitate further integration with the system by pre-processing it automatically and bringing it to the right repository or IT system in the right format to be integrated.
Celia, I want to ask you, how would a lab assistant like that structure the data so that you can sort of query it in, I guess, like a traditional way? Again, like my background is a computer scientist, right? I'm kind of old school, and when I think of data, I think of it in, a fully normalized, relational database where you're kind of controlling the language, right? And hey, here's a table that gives you, the 10 options you have on how you want to annotate this data. But if it's free form, in like a speech to text or something like that, how does that get structured in a way that you can efficiently, work through that data?
Yeah, so I mean, you have a different approach here. You could either constrain a bit the capture by guiding through a template, for example, and then putting the data at the right part of the template, or also sending a warning if the data is out of range or if it's something that you're not expecting. But then also you could take the text, the unstructured text, and label the different subparts, recognizing what is the meaning of it, if it's a parameter, if it's a result, and then sort out all this data at the end and export it either as an organized file or as also a metadata file in some languages to be integrated. So that could be a JSON file or XML or whatever format is the most convenient.
Interesting. Yeah. Thanks.
Excellent. So where do you think we'll see a big change in the next 5 years regarding data? Perhaps we'll start with Mario.
Okay, thanks. But what I can see, and that's already happening, is again that because there's more interest in reusing the data and better understanding the data, is that we will see that this again, learning from data is something that will increase, hopefully. I think it's already happening to some extent, and I guess it's the same with Amgen, or some of the Amgen. So that is what I can clearly see. And And the other thing that I can see, there's more and more scrutiny on quality from data. Well, we touched on data integrity. There's more and more interest, of course, to make sure that we record our experiments in a way that it can, well, that it holds up to of course to audits, but it also holds up to our own quality criteria, saying that only if it's recorded like this, then we can make better use of it in the future and learn from it. So yeah, those are two things that I can clearly see. I mean, the other thing that is happening in the labs, but it's just been happening for a while, is the general increase in automation in the lab. So more and more automation, also smaller scale, cheaper ones, small island solutions that can even kind of automate the smallest processes in the lab. That's the other thing that I do see at the very moment, and that's what's happening.
Excellent. Mike?
Yeah, great question, right? In the next 5 years, right? I think for the past couple of years, we've sort of evolved to where we have a vision of where we want to be in the next 5 years. And in now and in the near term, we're sort of working on the data engineering, just the mechanics of collecting the data and getting it in, fair, right? And usable and all that. So I think that's, going to largely be a solved problem in the next year, 2 years, maybe. Until then, like I mentioned earlier, we're kind of doing all this, or the scientists, everybody's willing to do all this based on the faith that we're going to have these great models, and that's where I think we'll be 5 years from now, where we'll be, these things will come to fruition, right? The models will be trained and mature and actually helping us make better decisions. The loop will kind of close back around, right? Celia had a slide where it was sort of this funnel and ramp, and what we had talked about earlier was like, that's actually a loop, right? That, you're going to come back and say, well, what's the next experiment that I should do? Or, how should I manipulate the parameters more intelligently? And I think that's where we'll get in the next 5 years, where that loop, the models will be in place and the loop will be, fairly automated.
And Celia? Sorry.
So we can make that cycle happen faster and, develop drugs for the patients that need them. That's the dream.
So Celia?
Yeah, I think we will see the lab processes becoming more and more seamless, hopefully leveraging mobile technology. And I can really imagine each scientist to have a mobile companion with them to assist them in everyday tasks at the bench, but also on the way home or from home to check some data or get also some direct insights to some questions that may happen during an experiment at the bench. So I see a bit more this mix of human and technology working together in the lab in a seamless way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mario, Mike, and Celia, for this illuminating discussion. I want now to turn to our audience for questions. So if anyone had any specific questions, they are able to raise their hand on the webinar platform, and we'll enable your audio, or you can use the chat or question function to send questions directly to us. And there are a couple of questions waiting, but I just wanted to remind people that they do have those audio functions if they do wish to ask questions directly. So please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question directly. We have a question from Pavan, which is, please can you comment on KPIs that data quality as a service would address in R&D labs?
KPIs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can I go first? I was wondering, because that's something we have. Sorry, it's just one thing that we've been discussing this as well. Is kind of how to make better use of the data to identify KPIs. Because in the past, like what we were doing is, I don't know, we were collecting, for example, data on how many samples an analyst in our labs would how many samples an analyst in our lab would analyze in a week or something like that, or how many, I don't know, how many documents were filed or something. And then again, in the end, you realize that those KPIs are not really meaningful to drive your business and also make decisions on, for example, do I need more people in my lab? Do I need more instruments? Do I need, I don't know, do I need better quality? What is the problem? And I hope, of course, that with more data being available to make these decisions, kind of, and by analyzing that data, yeah, basically having a better grasp on how to control the labs, and not control in a negative way, but really control of, okay, how do I make what are the decisions for the next year? How do I spend the capital that I have available to myself? How do I restructure my team to make that more efficient and make it less of a burden for them, for example, also. So yeah, I would hope that with this data being more structured and more holistic, also, that we have a better handle on deciding on KPIs.
Were there any further thoughts from the panel on that?
Could you read the question again?
I think the question was, please can you comment on KPIs that data quality as a service would address in R&D lab?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think, you know, what we're looking at now, right, is really, we're looking for an increase in throughput. You know, with the intent that, well, we need to generate, you know, an order of magnitude more data to have the volume of data to train these models. So I think, you know, I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but that's sort of where what we're focused on at the moment, right? Is can we increase our data generation by an order of magnitude while maintaining, you know, without having a loss in quality, because we don't want to just generate a bunch of crap, right? It's you know, the quality of that data has to be maintained, but can we generate it and marshal it into, you know, whatever the storage solution is for it? So that, I think that's sort of the KPI that we're looking at, is can we increase it by the generation by an order of magnitude? And then you know, again, now I sound like a broken record, but I mean, the scientists in the lab, I think they're personally looking at how painful is it for them to get that data entered into a system, if it's data that they have to enter manually. And so we're trying to move away from that as much as possible, but we're finding that, oh, some systems, you know, they sort of crumble when you start to load them, you know, with so much data, right? They become a lot less performant. So that's become an issue, and something that we're looking closely, you know, working closely on now. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that exactly answers the question, but it's the best I got for you.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind. Oh, sorry, Celia, after you.
No, sorry. I mean, it's something that is very difficult to measure, because as it says, data quality, it's qualitative, so it's not quantitative. So of course you can measure it by the quantity of the data, hoping that more data means better data and it's useful data and not just more data for the sake of it. But we have also other marker a bit more long term, which is the speed at which somebody can troubleshoot an experiment already. So we had also some of our customers that say, oh, I could troubleshoot like instantly my experiment because I just looked back at my note and the solution was in it, where before it would have required much more time to process it. And also the reproducibility. So the best example for us is when somebody has to reproduce an experiment that has been documented before with LabTwin, because then you can see how easy it is for this person to reproduce compared with traditional method of capture. So this is a mid-long term, let's say, way, and hopefully at one point or so we will see the quality of the data model that would just based on the quality of the data, and I would be very interesting to see what would be the difference between the data model across organization, depending on their strategy to build their model.
Excellent. So just a reminder to our audience, if you did actually want to have your audio enabled so you can ask questions directly in the attendee list, if you click the raise your hand button next to your name, you're able to we'll be able to enable your audio. We've got some really interesting questions here, but I think a few of them should be asked in a bit more detail. But Sadin, you've got a really interesting question about where is the AI in the digital lab assistant? So Celia, I think that's primarily for you.
Yeah, I mean, AI is always a difficult word where you can put a lot of things in it, but we do have AI, of course, in our smart assistant already with the language model, because it's in real time that we are transcribing the voice notes into text, and we're able to train our model to be able to understand scientific specific words that are not recognized by traditional voice assistant that will be trained, and then also to be able to structure, label, organize this data automatically.
Excellent. We've got a really interesting question here from Vipin. Could you please put some light on the reluctancy of scientists in adopting digital solutions?
Okay, can you repeat that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you shine some light on the reluctancy of scientists in adopting solutions? How are they currently looking at digital solutions, and those that are reluctant, what would you say to them, perhaps?
I mean, you know, human nature sort of resists change, right? People, you know, I mean, you get good at what you're good, you know, what you do all the time, and you feel like you're efficient at it, and then someone wants to disrupt that. Again, I've said it several times now, you know, based on the faith that, well, in the long run, this is going to be better, so we need you to sort of bite the bullet and do this now. You know, so I mean, it does take some top-down leadership to say, like, look, we need everybody to get on board with this and do it. We understand that there's going to be a, you know, somewhat painful learning curve or experience at the start, but you know, this is a strategic decision we're making, and we need you to get on board with it. You know, it can be a hard sell, right? I mean, I think one thing that's helping, right, is that, I mean, you can't throw a rock now without hitting AI, ML in like every solution that's being developed for everything in the world. If you don't include AI, ML with it, it's, you know, it kind of falls on flat ears. And so, you know, people are hearing that, and I think maybe there's a little bit of like fear of missing out, right? Like that, you know, you don't want to be the person that is the naysayer and, you know, sort of derails the effort. But ultimately, I mean, I think it's top-down leadership to, you know, to say, and understanding, right? To say, like, look, it may be a little more difficult for you to do what you're currently doing for a little bit, but this is what we're asking you to do. So we'll give you the extra time to do it. We'll give you the extra resources or the different resources or whatever it is. We're going to help you in every way we can to do it, but we need you to get on board with it as well, right? Because we do have this long-term vision and the promise is there. And if it doesn't work out, which is always a possibility, right? Then, you know, the leadership has to own that decision too, right? So, I mean, I kind of think that's where it is. Yeah, you're never going to stop, you know, people from grumbling at the water cooler or, you know, complaining about how many mouse clicks they had to do to record that feed, right? So it's always going to happen. But, you know, I mean, I think the good thing, at least in our industry, is as scientists, you know, they get it, right? That you have to, you know, try things and experiment with things to find the best solution. So.
Yeah, I think there's three important things to take into account to this change management. First is that if you don't have a right interface, it doesn't work because it's just badly designed. And this we see it also in our everyday life. When it's something that is too hard to understand or not appropriate, we don't use it. So I think that the first thing that you need to nail down, and at LabTwin, we really try to make the effort to be at the interface between the user on one side and the data on the other side, and not just take care of one side, because the usability of it needs both sides. And then the second thing, as Mike said, I think it's like sharing a bit the vision from the top management. Like, why are we doing this? What is the point? And I think he's right when he say you have to do things on face. But then if people don't understand why they're working for, what part of which exciting journeys they're part of, they are less likely also to make an effort for this or just to be excited about it. So I think there's a lot of communication to be done, and this can be both internally or also from general trends, if people follow trends. And then the third point for me is the onboarding, because it's one thing to understand how the tech is working, but at one point you don't have time, you're working hard, and it's like, how do I use it for my specific work? And we saw this also, like using a project management software. You're like, oh, it's great, there's a lot of colors, a lot of buttons, great, but how do I use it for exactly what I'm doing right now? And you don't have time to watch thousands of tutorials. So at LabTwin, we also try to take a lot of time to nail down the specific use cases of our customers and to onboard them specifically and explain them exactly how they should use it for this. And usually, once they learn from one use case, they can generalize for other ones, but it needs to be tailored to the needs.
I like that notion, actually, that you don't just throw the solution over the fence and say, okay, you bought it, here it is, it's installed, go for it, figure it out, there's videos, you want help. There has to be this period of hypercare, right, of where it's very focused, very personal, you know, helping people get up over that learning curve. I like that a lot.
Yeah, especially for tech that people are not so familiar with, and that's what the thing with voice assistant is still quite new. Not everybody is used to it or use it, let's say, in their lives, so that they need a bit of learning. And so part of our job is also to educate people on how to use it.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe to add to what was said, what I've seen, especially with this automation journey and digitalization journey that we're undergoing for the last few years, is it was important to have champions on board very early to identify people in your team that are actually interested in the solutions that you're presenting to them. For automation, for example, when we introduced that, well, in 2012 we started. In 2014 we went from almost 100% manual to 100% automated. There were people that were really interested in that, and they were the ones then, once they learned how to do it, they got the feel for it, they were also then capable of kind of helping the others to get on board. It might take a while, but I think it's important to, if possible, to try to identify those champions early. Same for digitalization that is ongoing at the moment. And the other thing that I like also about the comments from Mike and Celia is this reporting back the progress that is made, kind of making sure that people understand, okay, what have we achieved? So after if it's a few days, months, week, whatever makes sense, but really make them understand, okay, this is what we've achieved now. This is what you can do in addition to what you've done in the past. This is what you can do, what you or we as a team can do in addition to that. I think that is good, because then yeah, it's a very inclusive way of dealing with this change.
good point.
So I think related to this change management issue, and sorry, Matthew, as Matthew's here has two questions, but this one's very related to what we've just spoken about. So with this change management issue, I suppose there's a lot of areas of this that do need to develop. But he's asked, how would you describe the level of data literacy in the R&D space in regards to data management? Is it something that you need to spend a lot of time educating scientists about? So very similar themes to what we were just talking about. Matthew does have another question. In regards to data quality, do you focus on any specific data dimensions, say validity, reasonableness, accuracy?
Tough question, sir.
Tough question, yeah. This depends a lot on what kind of data we're talking about. No, I mean, it depends. What are we trying to describe with the data? What is this data supposed to describe? Because, yeah. Oof.
Yeah, you know, I mean, so we have talked about metadata a lot and collecting, you know, data that we haven't been collecting before. And I think in that regard, none of us really, you know, we sort of have ideas of like, oh, this might be relevant, it might not, let's collect it. That I think is kind of new. But honestly, as I think about it, I mean, the actual type of data we're collecting it isn't so much that it's new and different data, it's just more of it. And so I think in that regard, you know, it is the same type of data that the scientists have been working with, and that is their expertise, right? So I think there is a high degree of data literacy in that regard. I think the technical, you know, I don't want a chemist or a biologist or you know, any type of scientist to have to understand, like, oh, we have an automated process that sends it to an S3 bucket on AWS, and then we run a Lambda function that blah blah blah. Like that is not their job as scientists. They don't need to know the gritty details of that. So I don't think there's any kind of literacy in that regard from scientists. But as far as being able to look at the data and understand what it means from a scientific perspective, I think there's a very good degree of literacy. So I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but my interpretation of what you're asking, that's how I would answer that or address that.
Excellent. I think that might be about all we've got time for. So I wanted to bring the webinar to a close. If you have any further questions, please reach out to our panelists. I'd like to thank once again Mike, Mario, and Celia for joining us today and sharing their experiences. I also want to thank everyone for joining us and listening today and sending in your questions. I just wanted to see if you had any closing thoughts for our viewers.
Well, I'll say, write good interfaces.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, and it's
to come.
all about the scientists, right? So, yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thank you for joining. And if you have any questions or if you want also to see a demo, please reach out, and we're happy to proceed.
Excellent. Celia, how best can our audience reach you?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, or also the best is labtwin.com/demo, and then you can directly book a demo from this.
Excellent. And I think we'll be joining you and Mario at our Smart Labs and Laboratory Informatics event in September. So we're looking forward to that as well. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully see you all there as well.